All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming out for our first in our series of 3 public facilities master forums this fall. Thank you all for being here. Thank you also to the Westwood Public Library for supporting us, offering up their space to us this morning. So for those that don't know me, my name is Tim Pavova. I'm the superintendent here in the Westwood Public Schools. I'm joined by Lema Jean-Baptiste, who's our Director of Finance and Operations, and by Maya Plotkin, who's our school committee chair, and Tony Mullen, who's another school committee member. Really, the purpose of this forum is for us to talk about what's going on from our facility study perspective, and it really gets some feedback from you as the community to help inform our decision points that are going forward. So the format for this is I'm going to do a presentation, kind of talk about where we are. My apologies to those that may have seen this before, but I think as we frame the conversation, it's always good to remind ourselves of where we are currently. And then there's going to be opportunity for back and forth, either for comments or questions. We just ask that when we get to that part of the agenda, if people can please come up to the mic here, because we are broadcasting this through Westwood Media Center. And I do want to thank our friends from WMC that are here filming us here this morning. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right in. So for some background, in the spring of 2024, so a little about a year and a half ago, we conducted a master facilities plan. We worked with Doran Whittier as an architectural firm, and we really had 2 goals. The first was to identify the list of capital improvement needs we have in our buildings across the district. We have buildings from various ages, from the 1930s to Pine Hill that opened just a couple of years ago. But the second goal is really to look at long-range options for our schools. We know that there are particular challenges at both Sheehan and Thurston. Those are the 2 buildings with greatest need, and our study helped confirm that. But we wanted to develop options for a long-range plan with that particular focus, knowing that the decisions we make today are going to have long-lasting implications, and that we want to do this in the context of a larger plan for the community as a whole. I will say that the same firm also has done a master planning study for the municipal department. You know, we're not here to speak about that today, but know that ultimately it's one pot of money in the community as a whole, and we want to make sure that we work in partnership with our friends at Town Hall. And I want to recognize Molly Fitzpatrick and Stephanie McManus in the back of the room, who are here as well, because ultimately we need to work together as one community for what's best for Westwood as a whole. So our guiding principle in our work in the master planning study is that we want to identify the most educationally appropriate and cost-effective solutions for our school buildings so that we can continue to provide a top-tier education for our students. I'll come back to that phrase. It's not just what is most educationally appropriate. It's not just what's most fiscally responsible. We need to do both. And it's really leaning into that. And knowing particularly school buildings are only as good as the kind of education we can deliver inside of them. And that's the lens with which we look at the work that we're doing here. So our master plan had 5 key elements. I'm not going to go into all of these elements in detail this morning, but those elements were we wanted to know where we are now, so we wanted to assess our existing school buildings. There was a component of educational visioning because, again, it's about how we can deliver education inside of the facilities that we have. We needed to look at our enrollment and our capacity, knowing that when we build a building, we are not building it for the day that it opens, but we're building it for the next, ultimately, 50, 60 plus years. We can't project enrollment for 50, 60 plus years, but we can do that for about 10 years. And so we want to use that as the lens with which we look at our master plan options, and then potential solutions and estimated costs. So with that, we began with an assessment of our existing buildings. This is essentially, I'm not going to go into this. If you want to look for the details of what's in our master plan, you can go to our website. But it shows there are different components for each building, work that can be done in various areas, hard cost, soft cost, cost estimates. Again, that's not a level of detail we're going to go into this morning, but this is really a key chart. This is sort of the consumer report style chart for each of our school buildings on a scale from red poor to purple excellent in various areas like site and civil, site accessibility, functional use of building, mechanical systems, electrical systems, et cetera. Purple, Pine Hill had better be purple across the board, and it is, as a building that just opened. But you can see just by a quick visual glance that Sheehan and Thurston certainly raise to the top of our concerns here. The one place where Sheehan and Thurston are both green or greenish is structurally. They are buildings that were built in a different era when they were built sturdy. And that may be some of what we can say that's good about those 2 buildings. So they're built to last from a structural component. Obviously, we've had some challenges as recently as yesterday in some of our buildings. I want to just name the elephant in the room on that front. At Thurston, we had to do a forced dismissal yesterday due to a plumbing issue in the building. But this is where we are, and this is why we're having this conversation. We also looked at the educational plans and the educational layout in our building. So each of our spaces were identified what is their primary function. Is it a gen ed classroom? It is a special education classroom, gymnasium, auditorium, music spaces, all the breakout rooms, all those kinds of things. And then compared those spaces to what the current modern guidelines are for educational spaces. You'll hear us talk about the MSBA, that's the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They're the state agency that helps fund school construction projects. They were a great partner with us in Pine Hill, giving us north of, what, $20 million, about $21 million all told towards the construction of Pine Hill. And they're a good sort of even level benchmark to assess how our buildings are right now. So when we compare our existing school buildings to MSBA guidelines for space, those pie charts are designed to identify anything that is green. Those are educational spaces that are within 10% plus or minus of what the MSBA guidelines are. Anything that's red is undersized, anything that's blue is oversized. Again, Pine Hill had better be 100% green because we just built it in partnership with the MSBA. But you'll see, for example, again, to put the emphasis on Thurston and Sheehan, 46% of all spaces at Sheehan are undersized relative to current MSBA guidelines. 68% of all spaces at Thurston are undersized based upon MSBA guidelines. And a lot of that is just because when these schools were built in the 30s or in the 40s or when Thurston was added on to in the 50s, they were built for a different educational model than we know works today. It was built for kids to sit in rows and columns and sit at their desk and not move around and interact with each other during the course of the day. And we now know educationally that kids need to work in groups. We need to have small breakouts. We need all those kinds of things to deliver that kind of top-tier education we need to deliver. When we look at, what I'm going to actually do, and I realize that there are going to be a bunch of questions, I'm going to actually go through the presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end if that's okay. But I appreciate that, and we'll hold for now. When we talk about analyzing enrollment and capacity, we hired an outside agency, McKibben Consulting. They do this work nationally around enrollment patterns to really look at the next 10 years. This is the standard methodology that we use because this is the MSBA methodology to look at capacity. We realize there are some flexibility in these numbers, but you needed an apples-to-apples comparison when we look at enrollment. So these are the figures that we use. We have essentially you can think of it as a bucket, right? The black rectangles are buckets for how big a school is, how many students it can hold using those formulas. The yellow bar says what our capacity was when we did the study in 2020, or excuse me, what our enrollment was when we did the study in 2024. The red or the green shows what it's projected to be at its high point over the next 10 years. So on the left, you can see the high school. And it's good that the high school fits within the bucket, both currently and in the future, because we're not talking about the high school as a project or as one of our priorities with this. But you can see that we're at 90% capacity right now. We'd increase to 95% over the next 10 years. That's good. When you look at Thurston, however, as of this moment, we are 102% at capacity. So just slightly over, and it's projected to go up by another 80, roughly 75 kids in the next 10, 75, 80 kids in the next 10 years, and be at 113%. You'll also see on a future slide that that capacity is based upon the use of the modulars. We have modular classrooms, or modular, not even classrooms, modular wings, 2 modular wings at Thurston. Those are designed to be maybe at most 15 to 20 year temporary solutions. They are at that end of lifespan right now, but we are continuing to use them because we need to, but you'll see that on the future slide. This is our analysis of the elementary schools. So as of this moment, and the Pine Hill number was 475 when we did the study. I believe we're at 488 right now, so that's continuing to move along with our trends. You can see that we are within capacity at each of our elementary schools right now, and this may be a counterintuitive solution to what's happening from an enrollment perspective. In Pine Hill, the enrollment is projected to go down 10 years from now. The reason why is we are going to hit a peak in the next 4 or 5 years. But what happens when you build a new building, and I've seen this happen in community after community, families understandably will want to move into that geographic catchment area when the new school opens. They'll come in with kindergarten students, grade 2 students, grade 4 students, whatever it is. But they won't move when their kids hit middle school. So you see a quick turnover in the housing market when a school first opens, but then that turnover slows down as students move through. So that's why you see declining enrollment at Pine Hill. But we do see increasing enrollment over the next 10 years at Downey, MJ, and Sheehan, getting over where the capacity is for those 3 buildings. The important thing, if people are asking, so why was Pine Hill built the size that it was, is when we build elementary schools with the MSBA, they look not just at where our geographic catchment areas are at the time of construction, but they look at the K-5 population as a whole, or the elementary population as a whole. So that right-hand graph which shows that our enrollment as of last year was 1301, forecasted to be 1517. Our capacity is 1540. So that was built so that from a K-5 perspective, we are within capacity using the 4 school buildings that we have. This does mean, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that we will likely have to contemplate redistricting in the coming years to address the enrollment patterns. Or there are other solutions that are not great. We'll talk about those because we want to look at the universe of possibilities. But we are going to have to address the capacity issues through some sort of solution over the next few years. This is basically showing you what those enrollment patterns look like over time. Westwood High School, we're okay. This is the Thurston situation. So that purple line is the box that I showed you previously that is using the modular classrooms as spaces for capacity. The blue dotted line is what the capacity of Thurston looks like if the modulars didn't exist. When we talk about working with the MSBA as a partner, the MSBA does not consider modulars as permanent building space, which means that as of today, we're roughly 35% over capacity at Thurston because we are using those modulars to maintain the building assistance. I'm not going to go through each of these slides, but this shows you each of the elementary schools. But again, I think importantly, looking K-5 as a whole, we are going to continue to see an increase in our elementary enrollment, but we will remain within capacity K-5 over the next 10 years. So the question is, what do we do with all this information, right? We've looked at where we are as a district with our buildings, we've looked at the educational use of those buildings, and we've looked at our enrollment trends. So what are our options moving forward? And what we identified is we identified 6 potential options. I'm going to say that they are probably not all equally viable, but we do want to look at the universe of possibilities to make sure that we explore what is out there as a whole. Option 1 is the status quo. It's basically you always need to look at it. There is a cost to doing nothing, and we want to make sure that we explore what the cost of doing nothing is. And when I say doing nothing, it's not literally doing nothing, but it's just continuing to fix and repair, do some preventative maintenance, do the work that needs to be done to keep our schools operational in the exact same state they're in right now, but not move us forward. But we need to look at that. Option 2, to address the capacity issues at Thurston and at the elementary level, would be that we do our capital improvements and maintenance, but we would need to add modular buildings at Thurston, at Downey, at Martha Jones, and at Sheehan, if we were not talking about redistricting. That's option 2. Option 3 would contemplate building a new middle school, a new 6th grade middle school on the Thurston site. I can show you what that could look like from a test fit perspective in a minute. But without redistricting, we'd still need to look at modulars at Downey, at MJ, and at Sheehan to address the capacity issues. Option 4 would be looking at building a new elementary school. 2 shades of option 4, the more financially viable option is to actually look at a consolidated Martha Jones and Sheehan, and to build that on the Sheehan site. But if that were the option we'd explore, we would need to look at both a consolidated MJ Sheehan and a standalone Sheehan. But that would also require modulars at Thurston, certainly because of the capacity issues there. And without redistricting, we would also require them at Downey and potentially temporarily at MJ during the period of construction. Option 5 is the same as option 3, except that we would be redistricting the elementary schools as well. So it's build a new Thurston, redistrict the elementary schools so we can fit within capacity. And then option 6 is the one that would, full transparency, would involve the most change. That would be building a new 5 through 8 school, which could either be one larger 5 through 8 middle school or a co-located 5-6 upper elementary and 7-8 middle school that has some shared cafeteria, shared gymnasium. But you would have 4 grade spans on site. You could build that on the Thurston site. That would involve closing the Sheehan school and then redistricting because you can fit the K-4 students in the other 3 schools in scenario 6. So that's the range of possibilities that are out there. To get in a little more flavor of what this looks like, when we talk about modular buildings, this is what the where they could potentially be located. In each of these, the red star shows where the main entrance of the building is. People at home can't see my pointer here. So Downey, a modular, would need to go sort of closest to the street, down in front of the fields there. MJ would need to go in that front parking lot area. Sheehan would actually need to be detached from the rest of the building because of the building is not sprinkled, and so we would not be able to attach it because of fire protection codes. And so Sheehan would be detached in the parking lot there, or in the area back in the building heading towards the playground. And Thurston there's already one modular here in black, another modular here in white. It would be a 3rd modular back behind the building. heading towards the ball fields in the back. So that just shows you where modulars could potentially fit on site. In terms of a new school, and I want to be very clear, a new building has not been designed. This is simply, can a school fit with our educational program and with our enrollment on the existing sites? And that's what our design team looked at. So you could fit a new Thurston at either a 5-8 or a 6-8 model on the existing Thurston site. Where this white area is, that's the current building. You can kind of see the building's footprint here. That would become parking, some additional parking here, and a building could be built over top of where the baseball field is right now, with a plan to replace fields in this green area back up here. If people are wondering, there's a whole lot of green space up here, why couldn't you build a building up there? Unfortunately, there's a gas easement that runs right through the middle of that part of the site, and so that's an unbuildable part of the land, so we need to kind of fit it in the other space there. For Sheehan, the existing Sheehan building here is on the left side of this picture. And again, this is not a design building. This is just to see, could it fit, and could it fit as a consolidated MJ and Sheehan? And that could fit on the ball fields at the Sheehan site closer to Buckmaster. I want to acknowledge that the school department is not in jurisdictional control of that part of land and require a land swap with the town, in which in this scenario you could build a building here, and then ideally the town would take control of this area and you could replicate the ball fields on that side. That would require a separate action of town meeting for a land swap, but town meeting would obviously have to approve a project anyway, so I would assuming it would all be sort of one fell swoop there. And so we want to talk about estimated costs, and I'm going to acknowledge in this conversation that I want to pull out two different things. One is looking at the overall plan as a whole, and then I want to spend a little time talking about just new construction costs. I want to kind of differentiate those two sets of costs in this conversation. So when we look at the 6 options, what our consultants did is they looked at what is the cost of the repairs, what is the cost of the improvements, what is the cost of the building construction, and how does that escalate using a 5% escalation factor annually, which is a reasonable amount for construction right now. What does that look like over the next 10 years? And I'm going to say these numbers are large. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And there are things that are on that list that we are likely would not be able to get to in the next 10 years, or we need to make decisions around, how do we do this in a manner that is consistent with that goal of being educationally appropriate, cost effective. When the list looks at, for example, how do we create a top-of-the-line HVAC replacement that is most energy efficient, we may need to do that as I'm just going to use the high school as an example. That's the biggest number that's in that capital improvement list. We may need to look at, okay, how do you actually make that project more manageable from a cost perspective? But for an apples-to-apples comparison, we're using the same numbers across each column here, because that's really what this is about at this stage. So options 1 and 2, and I'm actually going to go to the next slide because I think this shows it a little bit better. Options 1 and 2 are basically the same order of magnitude, roughly $200 million. Cost of doing nothing is $191 million to our consultants. That would be the cost of the entire list of capital improvements. I'm going to say we get roughly about $1.1 to $1.6 million annually in our base capital. And then there are other items that we fund through special articles at town meeting. We are not going to see $200 million of capital funding. And I'm looking at our friends at Town Hall who can agree that we're not going to see $200 million in base capital funding over the next 10 years. But we use this as a jumping off point for the conversation. All of that here in column 1 is in this capital improvement and maintenance category. In column 2, if we add modulars, the cost of modulars in all those spaces is roughly $9 million. And so that increases the cost by that amount. In options 3 through 6, which all involve some level of new construction, from an order of magnitude perspective, they're all roughly in the same ballpark. Total all-in project, that includes like doing all the capital improvement work at the high school and at MJ and at Downey. There's really not much to do at Pine Hill other than continued preventative work, but I want to particularly point out the high school, MJ and Downey. Continuing to do that work while whatever needs to be done with a building that is not addressed in a new construction project, plus the cost of new construction, is all roughly in that $300 million plus or minus range. What this chart shows is down here is what the cost of a new school would be. For a new elementary school that's MJ and Sheehan, it's roughly $132 million. For a new standalone Thurston 6-8, it's roughly $155 million. For a consolidated MJ and Thurston and Sheehan, it's roughly $178 million. Again, these are not fully estimated projects. These are rough order of magnitudes for comparison purposes. But you can see that the more sort of new building you chew off, the more your capital improvement costs go down, right? So if it's 191 base, if we take the need to do CIP capital improvement work at MJ and Sheehan, that number goes down to 168. If we take Thurston offline, it goes down to 136. If we take Thurston and Sheehan offline, it goes down to 113, right? So there's a give and take when we look at those numbers, comparing what's the cost of new construction versus what's the cost of continued maintenance. This, again, shows this to you in a different way. This is what the ongoing cost for maintenance is for each of those buildings and what the relative cost of a new building is. I also want to note on this slide the question about, like, what can we continue to do for work? Because of Thurston, and I'm talking about Thurston and Sheehan in particular, because they are older buildings that are grandfathered in with the building code, if you do a certain amount of work, it triggers code compliance. I know we have the same issue, for example, with the fire station, right? Is that if you do a certain amount of work for renovation, it triggers code compliance. And so if we do $2.9 million a year, 8.7 in Thurston over a 3-year period, it triggers all these other code compliance issues, which means you have to do a lot more work at fixing an old building. You can see the numbers for Sheehan as well here too, for accessibility, as well as for fire protection. So now that we have all this information, the question is, what do we do about it? When do we do about it? What's our timeline? What's our approach here? And I'll hold this slide, thank you. So there's really 2 key decision points that the school committee and the community need to have. And the first key decision point is around what is our priority project. We know it's going to be either Thurston or Sheehan, and that decision point is driven by the desire to submit a statement of interest to the MSBA. The School Building Authority, again, funds school construction projects. They funded about $21 million for Pine Hill. We have an interest in not turning away money that somebody is willing to give us to help solve our problems. So we want to look at their timelines in a way that we can do this appropriately. They have an annual submission deadline of April. And so the next deadline is April of 2026. So in order to meet that deadline, we need to identify a priority by the end of December. The school committee is currently scheduled to take that vote at their meeting on December 10th, I believe, so that we can use the months of January and March to write the statement of interest, get approval from the school committee and the select board, and submit it to the MSBA. What the statement of interest says is that this is our priority problem in the district, this is why it's a problem, and here's how we want to explore solving it. It does not commit us to building a new school. It does not commit any funding. It is basically an invitation, or it's a request of the State Building Authority to partner with us on a school project to solve our issues and to allow us to get access potentially to their funding stream. So that's what stage 1 of this process is. The second key decision point, and actually let me go back to decision 1. Decision 1 does not say we are doing option 3 or option 4 or option 6. It simply says which building is our priority. So any of the shades of Thurston, whether that's 6 through 8, whether that's 5 through 8, would be part of that. We're prioritizing Thurston. Any of the shades of Sheehan, is it a standalone Sheehan? Is it a combined MJ Sheehan? Would be identifying Sheehan as the priority. So that's the decision point there. Decision point number 2 is, what are the key features of that school? What is the, if you were accepted into the MSBA pipeline, is it new construction? Is it renovation? Is it repair? What's the size? What's the enrollment? What's the grade configuration? Are there other locations we look at? All that gets resolved through the feasibility phase. And if we were accepted into the MSBA pipeline, if we submit in April, their acceptance might come in December of 2026. Those decisions would be made sometime probably late 2028 into 2029. So there's time to make those decisions if we're accepted into the pipeline. To show what that looks like, we've got 2 different ways of showing these timelines. With that timeline, construction borrowing could begin as early as fiscal year 2031 if we're on the fast track with the MSBA, with occupancy in September of 2032. But in terms of the overall timeline, right now with a little more specificity, December we identify the priority school, we submit the statement of interest to the MSBA in April, hopefully get accepted in December of 26, complete feasibility sometime in late 2028, 2029, begin construction in 2030, open in 2032. And so our next steps, this is what we're doing right now. We've had a number of conversations with PTOs. We're out here, this is the first of our 3 public forums. And we're going to continue to seek feedback until the committee reaches their decision point in December. And obviously, people that are here don't need to know these dates because you are literally here. But these are other dates that are happening for future forums if people are at home and want to be able to come in and participate in this process. So that was the really quick sort of whirlwind overview of where we are. There's a lot of information here. But really, this forum is about hearing what you have to say, hearing your questions, listening to your feedback. And so I'm going to ask Lemma if you can join me here at the front, and Maya if she can join me here at the front as well, too. I'll stay up here at the podium. And what I will ask people is if you can come to the microphone up here. I know you had a question a couple of minutes ago. So if you want to take our first question, I'm more than happy to. Yeah, let me grab a chair.
Oh. Hi. My question was entirely informational.
Sorry, can we ask people to?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, can we just ask folks to identify a name and address, please?
Of course. My name is Sarah Jones. I live at 50 Gay Street, and my child is a fourth grader at Pine Hill. And entirely my question was whether the classroom size standards are the same for middle and high school as they are for elementary school.
For gen ed classrooms, they're slightly different. It's roughly around 890, 900 square feet. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. The exception in elementary schools is kindergarten classrooms are bigger. And so you obviously don't have kindergarten classrooms in middle school. But other than that, they're relatively standard. What is different, though, are some of the other spaces, like the breakout spaces. Gymnasiums and cafeterias are based upon enrollment. So generally, a cafeteria design is based upon having 3 lunches in the course of a day. They look at enrollment to figure that out. But those are really proportional as opposed to the exact same size.
All right, thank you.
No, thank you.
Hi, my name's Katie Willett. I live at 91 Pheasant Hill Street. I'm in the Sheehan School District. You came to our PTA meeting a couple weeks ago, so this is kind of a follow-up to that meeting. We had a lot of questions regarding this, and it's the enrollment. So when you did the Pine Hill study, I would assume that we also did a enrollment study?
Analysis, yeah.
Analysis. And we're wondering if that is available, and if we're on par, if we are on track for that, if that's accurate information that we're having it right now. So, because it would be about 10 years now. So that's pretty much what came out of that.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if you have specific
So
examples.
I think we did that study in 2017,
Okay.
so we're almost at 10 years. That information is available. I think it's probably still under the project website
Okay.
on the school committee, but we can find it. I will tell you that when we did the Pine Hill project, we looked at the enrollment studies that they had done for the high school. And they had anticipated, a 10-year increase that we would be at about 1,000 students at the high school. And at that time, it was 10 years, and they were exactly at 1,000 students. So that study hit very well. This one, it's a little funky because, as Tim mentioned, the MSBA looks at the district as a whole. It doesn't look at per school.
Right.
So that 540 number that we built Pine Hill for was to accommodate for the whole district, which is why we will be within capacity on these enrollment studies. So if you're looking for Sheehan, it might not be that obvious, that what the enrollment was, but we can certainly find those studies. They were publicly available. They're probably somewhere still on the website.
Yeah,
That was definitely a question that came up afterwards.
Yeah, and I'll share related that too. And I went back to the slide in particular, right? Because I think it's a proxy for your question. Because when the enrollment would have been done for Pine Hill, they would have looked at that K-5 capacity. It is actually confirming that the analysis that we did in 2024, that right-hand graph shows us basically at where we should be. Within 30 students, which is, on a 10-year enrollment study is a rounding error, right?
Right.
So I think that's good confirmation. The other thing, just as a follow-up, is after the meeting at Sheehan, because there were concerns about those Sheehan projections, what they're going to be. Conversation about Sheehan has never been this big. I actually went back and looked historically. I believe the high point, actually there was a high point much earlier on when it was a different grade configure, when Sheehan was just a 3 to 5 school. But in 2014, I believe the enrollment was 388.
Yeah, no, it definitely has been
Yeah,
larger.
which is consistent with sort of what that number is there.
Yeah, I know when Kristen Evans first started,
Yeah.
she said that there was almost 400 students
Yeah.
there, so it's definitely been larger. But I think looking at it from a neighborhood perspective and from our community's perspective, when you mentioned that Pine Hills, people who've moved into the neighborhoods, their students, the families don't move out, right, because they've moved in. Wouldn't that be the same for all the elementaries? Because I have a second grader, a kindergartner, and someone who's going to be starting in 2 years, so only a 3-year-old. So I'm not moving anytime soon. I'm there for at least 18 more years. So I'm not moving out of my house. The majority of our neighborhood is elementary school age children or younger. So when they're doing the projections, where do these, do they come into our neighborhoods? Do they look at how do they actually do these studies? Because that's what we're confused about when we look at our neighborhood and the young young kids who are in our neighborhoods who are going to be going to the elementary school. Where does that come from?
Yeah, so I mean, they are not literally driving into each neighborhood and looking at every house, right? But they do look at the housing trends over a period of time. Having experienced this in a former district as well too, what happens, there's a saying we use, is if you build it, they will come, right? And so what you typically find, and when we look at what happened with Pine Hill, we're finding this as well too, there are people that are no longer have students of schooling age who may not have planned to sell their house at a certain point in time, but when a new school opens in their catchment area, you see housing sales jump up in that area around the time of the new school opening. And so you have a disproportionate share of turnover at that point in time. And then there's the natural cycle that happens through enrollment. So that's why you see like the fluctuations over a 10-year span. But there is an acute change in the housing market when a new school opens in that particular catchment area. That I've seen repeated in multiple communities.
Okay. And then I did have another question. I don't want to take anyone. Is it okay if I ask another question? Now, with the MSBA, obviously the money that we'd be getting would be just for the new building, correct?
Correct.
Is it worth it? Because from my understanding, there were a lot of restrictions around, or not restrictions, but there were a lot of things that we had to do for Pine Hills. Make it eco-friendly, or utilizing certain spaces that maybe the town would say, oh, maybe we could have, the food bank here, or a community space in Pine Hills, and it was not allowed because of using MSBA money. So is it worth it to go through this process to get MSBA funding when there would be limitations?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Maya speak to this a little bit too, because it is sort of a larger, political and community question too, which is, that is always one of the analyses that we're going to do, right? When you talk about a project and our effective reimbursement rate is likely in the 20-ish% range. So if you're talking about a building project somewhere between $130 and $180 million, let's say that's, $26 to $36 million. And the question is, would the town be willing to pass that up for greater flexibility in both project design and timeline? That is a question that is beyond my sort of jurisdictional authority to answer. But Maya, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
So I will say that when we first started the MSBA partnership, I did think, wait a minute, this seems to be a little bit more restrictive.
Right.
As we moved through the process, what I realized is that it actually made the project a lot better. The process, the sort of requirements really force a district to evaluate every single aspect of the project. And I was ended up being very grateful for that. It does take longer than a normal private construction project, so there is that component, probably by about a year, I would say. But, we received $21 million, and so we took a $91 million building, and the taxpayer burden is only $60 million because of other incentives we received as well. And so that's a deal.
Yeah.
And I think in this day and age, whenever, we are, as a school committee, are very conscious of every tax dollar that we're spending. And so for me, I would say yes. I would say it is worth it. They don't dictate how we use the building. Our education delivery dictates how we use the building. And there's things that we overrode, right? Like for Pine Hill, they wanted a small gym. And we said, well, the community has been telling us we need more gym space. We're actually going to build a bigger gym. And the difference is they just don't reimburse for that part of it. The sustainability initiatives, that was driven by us. You know, we may have gotten additional incentive points from them for that, and we did, so we got a little bit more money. But Westwood made the decision, you know, we really want to invest in sustainable buildings. So that was really a programming decision as opposed to an MSBA decision.
Okay.
So I would say, it was such a positive process, and we got, I mean, $21 million is a lot of money. So I would say it is worth it to go through this process, certainly to try to go through the process, see if we even get into it. And I think that any sort of restrictions we put on, they put on us, could end up working for our benefit.
Okay.
That's just my experience.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning. Antigone Grasso, 44 Oak Street. Had a couple of questions. I also had a question about the enrollment, meaning aside from just the Westwood High School projections, how accurate overall are these companies, right? When you look at multiple studies, what's the degree of confidence that we have in these 10-year numbers? Because I think, you know, I get that they looked at for Pine Hill, the total district. Clearly, there was going to be redistricting looking ahead, and I don't know that that was necessarily communicated, you know what I mean, I think to the community at the time. So I think this is going to be important to have that information. So that was one thing. And then the second thing is obviously everything going on with FS1. What is the school committee's plan to encourage the town to look at a long-term capital plan for all buildings? Because we have these independent forums, it's all kind of siloed, and then FS1 gets voted down twice. So I think that is what I'm hearing residents ask for. So this pressure, I think, to get to a December decision, I think that might be something we want to think through, because barring a town plan, you know, this is 200 million or 180, whatever it might be. FS1 is, who knows what it is. The town hall is another. DPW is another. You know, whether Sheehan comes offline or not, like there, I think that town plan really needs to be incorporated because it's all one pocketbook for the taxpayer. So that would just be kind of a comment. And then can we go back to the incremental, the 191, but then it had it itemized between CIP and maintenance, right? So I understand being able to put this out to get a relative cost. I get that. Thinking back to the 1.6 million we get in capital dollars every year, even that second, the CIP and maintenance row, even if we go to number 6, because look, ideally if it was cost wasn't an issue, I would say number 6 sounds the most reasonable. 113 million, that's 10 million a year of CIP and maintenance, which we don't even have. So this is another thing. I think before it even, like before I could even make a vote on this, I would want to know prioritization within the 2.6 million for Thurston, right, without triggering all of those accessibility thresholds. Really what needs to be done? Like if that, I think we need more granularity at this point to be able to make a decision, because, you know, these are theoretical numbers. It's relative, but what's the real cost to renovating, to triggering or not? Like, what would the prioritization be of the first top 5 things that we needed to do at Thurston or Sheehan, and what were their costs?
So let me speak to that last point first, and then I'll let you come back to the larger town issue, because I think that falls more in your realm than mine. You know, there is the overall the facility study report is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, right? So if you go to the website, you go into the spreadsheets that are on the website that show the cost analysis, that's broken into essentially 3 different time spans: 1 to 3 years, 4 to 6 years, 7 to 10 plus years. So to kind of get a greater level of granularity, I would look at that left-hand column of 1 to 3, because that would identify those projects that are of our highest priority. So for example, when we submitted our draft capital plan to school committee, knowing in the context of sort of what is available for overall capital funding, like that's the area that we look at to prioritize those items. So we just had that conversation at the, it was the September school committee. Or no, it was the October school meeting. Yeah, I forget what month we're in right now. There's a lot going on. So, but we just had that conversation at school committee around what are those priority items, at least for FY27. FY28, FY29. I know we got some feedback from the committee that night to look to invest a little more money in Thurston in the short term, because we know we have a whole generation of kids coming through that building. Yesterday's events, I think, certainly speak to the need to do that. And so, again, that level of granularity is not riveting conversation for this kind of a forum, but all that information is there on our website that you can dig into those details with a little bit more specificity. I think for further iterations, as we get closer to, if we get to the point where we're having a vote, right? Because that, again, is a couple of years out. Really, right now, what we are looking to do is to identify a priority project to seek a partnership with the state. That is really all that first decision point does. It doesn't commit funds, it doesn't commit to a specific option, but is about looking to try to seek partnership with the state for a priority project. I think, to your point, all that stuff gets fleshed out significantly more in the feasibility phase. And that's where that level of granularity and detail would come forward prior to any kind of community vote on that process.
Okay, so the trigger doesn't commit feasibility funds?
No, it does
Okay.
not.
We actually have to go to town meeting
I remember
for
that.
feasibility funds.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And
yeah.
I can sort of, and just building on what Tim said, that line, that CIP, capital improvement plan, this is a consultant's report.
Yes, we know
okay?
consultants.
Right. Everybody knows what consultants
Yes.
do. So this is like, you have all the money in the world
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna fix your building. And that's what that $191 million is. To Tim's point, there are buckets of years, but there's also priorities within that bucket, right? So they might have in there, hey, you guys really need to put in the super duper sustainable electrical system that will last, 200 years. We probably don't want that,
Right.
right? So that number is like best case for a town that has unlimited funds, but it's over 10 years and it's not prioritized,
Right.
right? So I don't think we would spend 191 million, is my point.
Right.
And
But
I think,
Yeah.
I would say, as a consumer of that report, what was helpful for me is seeing the key, what is there in colors, right? In terms of what are the buildings that have the most need here? And what do these consultants say about that? Like,
Right.
what are the weak points in these buildings? Is it the HVAC? Is it the plumbing? And we are observing that, and that's what informs the capital plan that we've submitted to the town to request funds for the next 5 years, a more like short-term horizon, but kind of anticipating what we might need for repairs in the coming future. And the reality is that both Sheehan and Thurston are buildings where we have significant potential needs, and where the needs, especially the unknowns, may drive projects that then start to trigger
Yes.
code issues. So that's why we are here and thinking about them in the context of the building project question, because of these, unknowns.
Right.
And
then to address the question of the town, we actually are working with the town. There is something called the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. I sit on that, Rob Gotti sits on that. There's members of FinCom, there's members of the town just at large on it. Stephanie and Molly are on it. So and this has been going on for 2 years, right? So we're trying to come up with some sort of comprehensive plan. And I think the idea was that, you can come up with a plan now and you can say, over the next 20 years, these buildings need to be replaced and this is the order in which we're going to replace them. We could try and do that. The issue is that you're working with really, really old buildings, and we know FS1 has structural issues. We know Thurston has major plumbing, HVAC issues. And so those, I think, are the two buildings that are the priority for, I would say, the town, meaning town and school. It's hard to say, like Carby Street, Town Hall, where those would fall after that, because things change and buildings age and then something happens and all of a sudden you have to do a repair. So I think from my perspective, I sort of assumed that, we would have FS1 begin, that would pass. And so that would be, 2025 when we voted for that money. So then voting for a new school 6-7 years later seemed hopefully feasible for people. I think now that timeline has become scrunched, right? And I don't know when FS1 will come up again. My guess is in 1 to 2 years. which puts our timeline. Do we extend the timeline for Thurston? Do we, or Sheehan, or whatever project we pick? Do we keep it where it is because of the need? So these are sort of the conversations we're starting to have and that we want to hear. I mean, ultimately, you guys decide what we do. That couldn't have been more clear with Pine Hill or with the fire station, right? The town decides what the town builds next. So that's why it's so important for us to talk to as many people as we can, because if you guys don't want a new school at all, we need to plan for that. Or, you know what I mean? So it's,
Yeah.
we're trying to come up with a long-term plan, but all we know right now is that these two buildings are in need of something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I totally
buildings,
get it, and I get trust me, I think anyone who's been through a renovation knows, like, things get triggered and whatnot.
Right.
And I think a capital plan, again, it's a plan, right? Just like a budget is a plan, and then
Right.
if there's
And the
unexpected
plan
things
could go
come up.
sideways.
Of course, but I
Right.
think just having a plan, even with a footnote of it's not perfect.
Right.
Is helpful. And then, what was I gonna say? Yeah, and I think having those details on the website is fine. I think putting this out there, because I don't even know, like, if there's plumbing issues at Thurston and bringing it up to code is like $4 million and then would likely trigger an accessibility threshold, like, that's important information for the town to know. So again, we could go digging, but now you're leaving it to everybody to go digging. I think putting it out there would just be more transparent and helpful for people to understand what kind of order of magnitude, like you just said, that top of the line electric system, if we're not even going to do it, then don't even present it, right? Because
Yeah.
it's consultant speak. So I think that type of transparency based on what you all know are the real priorities and what the facilities department knows, like the real priorities, that would be helpful for us to know what's the order of magnitude we're talking about for a new HVAC at Thurston to retrofit
Right.
it.
And I think we definitely will get into that. I think to Tim's point, right now, we're just trying to figure out if we're even gonna do a project, right?
Yeah,
So,
true.
once we have the project, that's when we get into that granularity, right? That's when we will sort of, because it doesn't make sense for us to dig into the capital improvement plans of all 6 of these options,
Right.
right? Because that's just a waste of our time.
Yeah. It just looks unrealistic.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's
Yes.
what the reaction is when you
Yep.
see these numbers. You're like, no way.
Right.
So I just feel like that might shut down people in conversation
Yeah.
from the get-go.
And that's a fair point, right? And when you put out information into the public,
Yeah.
you put out information into the public.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So trying to sort of balance being as transparent as possible without throwing chum in the water and stirring up issues that we don't even need to talk about yet. It's a balance. And, you know, did we err on the side of putting too much out there?
Yeah.
This is the report we got, you know, and we don't really want to hide that from people, and we want to address it and try and explain it as best we can,
Yeah.
while still saying, none of this is relevant yet. It will become relevant, and when it does, we will provide even more detail, but right now, our main decision point is, A, are we going to put in a statement of interest?
Yeah.
And if we do, is it Sheehan or is it Thurston?
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit more on timeline, because you had talked about a December decision. The December decision is to authorize us, or at least to provide direction for creating the SOI, right? The SOI doesn't get submitted until April. I think our hope is that we will have some more clarity around where we are in some of this common planning with the town, right? We would have some more clarity by that time of submission than we would by December, right? So I want to acknowledge that as well, too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Antigone.
Hi there, Eileen Siegel, 257 Alder Road. I am a preschool parent, and I am president of the preschool PTO. So this affects my daughter and her peer group and the moms that I have connected with. So I feel extremely invested to be here. What I will say is, something I'm continuously humbled by is listening to other people bring up questions and things I hadn't thought about, And also my lens, I'm a special ed teacher. It's what I do. It's my job. All I do is think about kids all day. But it's really important to hear people bring up consultancy, financial statements, things that I don't even think about people thinking of because my brain immediately goes to the kids, the kids, the kids. But isn't that why we're a community? Because we all bring our piece, and hopefully we can all listen to each other and get it taken care of. I did want to ask a question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer this, because I know we're choosing to focus on whether to go forward. And if we do, are we going to focus on Sheehan or Thurston? And I'm just saying that to really center myself, just keep myself on task. Is there an option that is the least amount of modulars? And I am going to, for either of those, without getting into feasibility and next steps. For this first
Yeah.
step, which one is potentially the fewest modulars?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's options 5 or 6, which would both center Thurston as the priority project, because that either one involves a level of redistricting that helps address the modular issue. In option 4, which is where Sheehan or MJ and Sheehan are prioritized, you're still going to have a capacity issue with Thurston. And you can't redistrict your way out of the Thurston capacity issue because there's only one middle school. So that's the answer to that question.
So the reason I'm asking this is I work in a neighboring, I work in Norwood. We just got a new 5 through 8, and as a special education teacher, I do understand that those are the students with the smaller classes that get, that get allocated to those spaces, but those are the children that are most vulnerable learners. We just talked about MCAS scores and populations, and when we look at big numbers, they're our small population, but they're so important. They're also, if they're well taken care of, it helps the classroom run well and the school run well and everybody does well. So the reason I'm asking about the modulars is I do not like modulars. I had to teach in them for 9 years. It was awful. It is hard for children to learn, whether they have anything. We also have children where it's with a mental, we know that mental health, anxiety has been rising. There's extra sounds, there's all these little extras that do matter. I'm very, very worried about any option that requires more modulars to really just piece it back to think about what are our children going to experience and what are the children that we see in our neighborhood going to experience. And I had one more question I wanted to have clarified. Well, actually, I had two. Sorry, I get so passionate about this. I also want to encourage and reiterate the urgency because yes, I didn't even know about children getting sent home from Thurston yesterday, but what that says to me is children were surprised, they had their day disrupted, teachers have to pivot and teach what they didn't get to teach and find time they don't have, and then parents of an age group, children are wonderful. I love middle school. They're crazy. Their brains, they're trying to figure it all out. So to know that your middle school child, maybe if you can't pick them up, is trying to get home, that's really scary. And even if they are 11, 12, 13. So I'm really hoping that we can move forward because this isn't the first time this has happened. I do recall last year there was something, and I just want to call attention to our children's experiences, number one, but also, and again, my daughter's 4, so she is supervised as best I can. She's crazy. But just to also acknowledge the middle school parents that had that surprise, because it's very important and valid.
Not ideal.
No, it's not ideal. And then I'm sorry, I'm almost done. And also, and I know this will be decided later, but I also really need to push hard. So at the preschool, we haven't had a program director since June. Again, our teachers are amazing. The service, we are so lucky in Westwood to have the people we have. I know Lori Semino she's doing a great job with what she have. I do feel like we're falling through the cracks. Also, we're too small. For both of these buildings, and again, I know this isn't something that is going to be decided today and isn't in step 1 of the process, but I have been following this. is space for the preschool also going to be considered, which, if a new building is created to move forward?
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
The slightly longer answer is whether or not that is space explicitly for preschool, or whether there is some level of space swapping that allows the preschool footprint to
Yes.
expand. Both of those would be on the table.
Okay. And I don't need a definitive
Yeah.
answer, I just
And we
really-
don't have one yet, so.
No,
yeah.
and that's fine, but I know any preschool parents that are listening, we need to hear that.
Yeah.
So because,
Yeah, no, it was not part of this presentation. I know we've talked about it previously. We do not have a large enough footprint for preschool right now. And so that's something we need to address, both in the short term, that's why we have a classroom using Pine Hill right now, and we need to make sure that we address it in the mid to long range as well.
okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that with all the space that we're talking about and projections, that our little ones are also factored in when those, with decisions being made. And again, I know we are just focusing on other things, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up
Yep,
that as well.
thank you.
Thank you.
Tara Themistocles, 294 Clapboard Tree Street. My question is kind of similar to what I asked at the FS1 meeting. How are you going to put all of this out to people so they don't have to deep dive? I know you're holding 3, meetings to go over this, but it's unfair because as a community, most of us can't get to these. And I really think as a whole, when you're making these decisions, it's such a short timeline by December to involve the entire town to get a good decision made. So I just was wondering, how are you guys going to put it out there on social media so we don't have to deep dive into the websites?
Do you want to take that, or do you want to start, and then you can add on if you'd like?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a reason that we're holding these 3 different forums in different times and different formats, right? We're doing one during the day, we're doing one in the evening, we're doing one virtually, so there's an opportunity for people to participate in different ways. We are certainly putting out to the school-age population, we have the ability to push that out. We don't have the ability to push out to the broader community, just because we don't have the resource, or it's not like we have an email list of everybody in the community, right, that we can access in that regard. I think we have tried to do some messaging through some of the local media. I'm going to acknowledge, that there are, and this is my own personal bias here related to social media. I have some personal hesitations about what we're seeing around social media and the impact on children, how school departments use social media. We could get in a whole larger discussion about that. But I also know that it's a valuable tool as it relates to the community as a whole, right? So, we are continuing, we're having these conversations, school committee meetings, we're having these forums, we're hitting the PTOs. I know I've had some conversations with the Council on Aging to be able to have some conversations there as well, too. So that's some of the work that we're doing in the community as a whole, but I don't know if you want to add to that, man.
Yeah, and I think, we're trying to push it out as much as we can. All of these community forums are being filmed. You can watch them at your leisure on Westwood Media Center. The materials are available on the website. I don't know if I posted about this, but I try and post about these things on social media so that if you're scrolling, whether it's Westwood Bulletin Board or, the Islington 109 Center, you see an advertisement about it. We try and get it out as much as we can. If people have other ideas how we can reach other people, we'd love to hear them. Because as I said, we really need to understand how the town is feeling. These are huge projects, and you guys decide whether or not we do them. So we need to hear from the town, but there's only so many ways that we can go in there. So if you have other ideas that we can get into, we'd love to hear them.
I mean, I think that that's super important for the other ideas because clearly people are speaking up, voting
agree.
twice
Yeah.
when we voted to go forward and spend all that money on the FS1, just drawings, and now people voted twice no. So I think the community outreach on social media, as much as I agree on social media, not my biggest fan, but if you're not doing it, there's no other way. People are 30 seconds to 60 seconds of scrolling to get as much information. People are busy, no one has more time, and this is all time consuming. So in order to get a good, town meeting, I don't feel like these 3 forums are great, accurate.
I do want to level set here. Again, we're not proposing any project, right?
Yeah.
We're just deciding, are we going to go to the MSBA? And if we are, is it Sheehan or Thurston? So those are pretty simplistic, I think, points,
So
right?
can we put that out there in a survey? Like you put out the surveys constantly, put that out
Yeah.
there. It's a great,
We can.
read.
We can send it to the school district's population. It's hard to send a survey with no context, right? So we could link the presentation and say, before you do the survey, please watch the presentation so you understand like what you're voting on. Otherwise, the survey results might not be as accurate as we want them to be.
I mean, 10 bullet points, and then people can deep dive for the 10 bullet points, but without understanding what the bullet points are of this meeting, people don't deep dive because they don't even understand. It's
Yeah.
just way too lengthy to try to, you follow this for years and still don't understand it. So unless you're bullet pointing the 10 most
Yeah,
important
we can.
things.
I think we can certainly take a stab at it and see how it goes. We haven't done that historically, but I think this particular situation, it would work. It could work for it because, like I said, this is sort of a fairly straightforward decision for the school committee to make in December. So I think we could definitely take a stab at that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Danielle Uslu. I'm at 29 Stern Street in Westwood. I have a daughter at Martha Jones in first grade. So I think this was really helpful. One thing that I notice is not included, so we're looking at costs, which I know is obviously a very important thing, like costs of repairs and cost of this, but one thing that we didn't talk about, and sort of to tack on a little bit on what you said about the children's experience, as a healthcare provider, I worry a lot about how the health of the children is impacted by the state of the buildings, and it's a cost, really, that isn't really factored into all of this that I think is difficult to measure, so I understand why it might not be done, but I think is important for the community to consider. I don't know a whole lot about the Sheehan situation, but I have heard a lot about Thurston. At least 3 or 4 instances last year of sewer and gas issues, and then another one yesterday, also mold issues, which I have heard you have tried to address, but when you think about, a plumbing and HVAC system that's not working properly and is leaking, you can try all you want, but my guess is there is a lot of mold that you are not able to see and take care of. So probably these kids are living or learning, trying to learn in situations where their health and cognitive health may not be really great to be able to learn, and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I do both Western and I also do functional sort of health things, and mold is a big part of that. I see a ton of issues with cognition, and that's even like, I don't see young kids, but I see like adolescents. It really impacts their ability to think and learn. And not only that, autoimmune diseases are on the rise. Generally speaking, these can be triggers to those things. Asthma, and when kids lose time from school because of those things, I have heard neighbors say their kids have come home from Thurston because they can't breathe, because they have terrible allergies, probably to what I imagine is mold, and asthma reactions to it. And I know all of that is difficult to say, and it's it's an old building, it's no one's fault, but I just think it's important to consider the costs of that and the children's experience of that and how it impacts their learning, generally speaking, and then also for the community to consider that when they are making a decision about this, whether to repair or to build a new school, because I mean, perhaps there's a way to repair that and also repair all the mold and damage that might be done in the school over so many years. But what is that? Is that going to be sufficient to maintain the health of the kids if we just repaired versus is this too far gone? We could repair and the system won't leak, but is all this going on in the ceilings and in the building that we just don't really understand the full impact that might have on the kids? And is building a new building the only way to really address that? And again, I haven't heard as much about Sheehan, so I'm only speaking about Thurston because that's what I know. But I just thought it was really important to consider like the health aspects for the kids as we make this decision.
I appreciate that. So, and one of the things that I will say, and I haven't said it yet in this forum today, but I know I've said it other times and I will continue to say it, is that whatever decision is made, if we're talking about new construction, that's still 6 years out, let's say, for opening. And we have a whole generation of kids going through that building, that we want to make sure that we protect their safety and health and the safety and health of the staff that work in those buildings.
Right, and I forgot to mention the teachers. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that
yeah,
was
no,
something
of
else I
course,
thought
right.
of as well. Yeah.
And so when you talk about Thurston, so for example, when we had the situations last year, and I said this in my message to, for those in the room that may not know, because we communicated directly with Thurston families, we had an issue with a sewage leak yesterday underneath the main floor of Thurston. We not only, repaired the section of pipe that was broken, we actually replaced 120 feet of sewage pipe yesterday from a preventative perspective to try to make sure that, we were not going to let this happen again. Thank you to Lemma and Tom Carey, our facilities team, for doing that. What we did last year after our issues and what we are going to do again this year is we did indoor air quality tests inside the building about the very issues that you raise. Our IAQ test last year showed no evidence of mold in the classrooms in Thurston. So I know there have been speculation and conversation around that in the community, but I want to say that explicitly that our last IAQ test found no actionable items related to mold.
So when they're doing those testing though, are they going to the driest part of the building and doing a test? Or are they going to the area that has the most problems or going up in the ceilings and testing?
I can maybe speak to
where
it
there's
just there.
wetness.
At the time when we did the indoor air quality testing, it was, the specialist came in and asked about, like, where are the areas where we have had moisture? And those are the classrooms that they tested. So they were trying to identify, like, in the zones that would be hotspots, potentially, for any risk. But I just want to add one thing about Thurston. There's no question, it's an old building, and so there are consequences of having an old building. It's harder to repair things. Fortunately, the leaks that we've identified were identified very quickly. I mean, the one yesterday, we knew within minutes of when it had started, so we immediately started to plan and respond. Likewise, with prior heating system leaks, we were able to, we saw it, so it was very quickly identified and addressed, so the space was dried out fast. The town invested in updating the univents at Thurston, which makes me sleep better at night because we have new technology in the classrooms. Every univent, which is the ventilator that circulates outdoor air with indoor air and heats the space, all of those are newly installed since 2021. So those are latest technology in terms of like air quality. And our modulars they get air from the rooftop units. So those are also newer pieces of equipment. So it's a 1938 building, but there's a lot of new equipment in there that's providing like the air circulation. Yeah. So it in that sense, like to Tim's point, we're trying to take care of the students who are in the building now. And we would be doing more if we were worried about some serious like health issues or any risks to those students. But there's a limit to what you can do in repairing an old building at a certain point. And I think, Eileen, you were saying, the students' experience in modulars or the students' experience in classrooms that were built in 1938, that's a different story. And there's nothing we can do about that without a new building.
Yeah, and I think that's just that's like what I wanted to highlight is the importance of their health and like, is like patching and fixing really gonna take care of the larger issue? I know you guys are doing what you can with what you have right now, but it's a concerning issue and it's our kids' health, so, yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, Nigel Smith, 814K. I know when we went through the Hanlon project, there was a lot of surprise at how quickly Hanlon was admitted into the program in terms of getting the MSB, and it kind of, yeah, it's sort of like, okay, we're all in on this. Do we think Thurston and Sheehan are both equally as horrific as the Hanlon was and will qualify so that we're actually having a real conversation about if we can pick our poison?
Yeah.
Because our neighbor here who said, would we take non and fund this without it? Unlikely, because they're both such atrocious buildings. I have 2 middle schoolers right now. And so that's probably a yes or no for that. And then I'm curious, Medfield said no. Lincoln voted no. did Norwood vote no as well?
I thought they voted yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But, all right, so, but, like Lincoln,
I think-
great, so
yeah.
you said no to the state money. That doesn't solve any problems, right? So same thing as the FS1,
Lincoln
right?
still had to build it.
That's right.
They just built it without the state
That's
money.
correct. So I'm curious, are there any horrific stories that you might be willing to talk about speaking at a school if you're allowed to? But more importantly, are both Sheehan and Thurston slam dunks without a crystal ball, but like likely going to be accepted into the program?
So, I mean, nothing is ever a slam dunk. I would say the question of timeliness of submission to the MSBA, I obviously Westwood has an experience. I came out of the very tail end of the Pine Hill project, but I have experience working with the MSBA in my former district as well. It is actually, I think, the right time to submit. They have seen the number of, I was at a conference this summer where the executive director was presenting. They have seen the number of submissions for core projects into the MSBA program actually decrease. So typically the funding rate had maybe been around 20% or so. Almost 50% of core projects, I think it was 22 out of 45 in 2024 were approved. So that actually puts us in a little bit better stead. I think the other things that certainly work to our advantage, one is the building itself, the issues that, you talked about both buildings. I think, yeah, no, and so I want to kind of measure my words here, right? Things that put buildings in greater stead and priority with the MSBA. Issues with capacity. If I go back to these slides here, the blue line for Thurston is what the MSBA considers its capacity. Sheehan is at capacity right now, but is going to increase. Thurston is over currently. So just to compare and contrast on the capacity issue there. There are critical infrastructure issues. We have certainly seen what has, and pardon the pun here, bubbled to the surface, more with particularly one of those schools more recently. I think the other thing that quite honestly helps is the district having a successful track record with the MSBA. The fact that, and I know May have talked about this at school committee a couple of nights ago, the Pine Hill project came in on time and and on the MSBA's budget, and from a town share perspective, $9 million under the town share of the budget. So having that kind of the MSBA is really interested in getting school projects built. And so if you have a track record of successfully building school projects, that helps your submission. I think that's regardless of whether it's Sheehan or Thurston. But I think that certainly works to our benefit as well. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
One thing that doesn't work in Sheehan's favor in terms of the capacity question is the fact that we could redistrict.
Right.
So, whereas at Thurston, there's just absolutely no solution except modulars for the capacity issue, and we have 2 modulars, and
Yeah.
so it restricts the availability of land for other uses.
And I think, and it was, as we said, the MSBA will tend to look at a district holistically. Like, so they might say, yeah, you have a capacity problem at Sheehan, but you have capacity at Pine Hill, so all you would need to do is redistrict. So,
Yeah, and I would just say one other thing that works to our advantage is the fact that we've done this plan, right? If you go to the MSBA and say, hey, we have a problem, can you help us fix it? Or is, hey, we have a problem, here's the work that we've done, here's how we're thinking about this over the next 10 to 20 years, can you partner with us? That puts us in better stead from an application perspective.
but again, no guarantee we'll get into it, and if we don't, and we would submit April of 2026, so next April, we would hear December, so a year from now, a year and change. If we don't get into it then we need to start having hard conversations within the community, right? Do we go forward? Do we wait, try to get in again? So, yeah.
Redistricting sounds reasonable,
You may need to go to.
Sorry, we just need you on the mic for yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Erin Kelly, 53 Phillips Brooks Road. I have a 3rd grader, a 1st grader, and a preschool. Can you speak to the flexibility of the MSP statement of interest? I heard you say that this is not, a hard determination of what it is we're going to do. This is one of the first sort of deep dives that I've done here, and I really appreciate it. But from an outsider's perspective, right, if you put all the things on the table, if money were no issue, 6 is the best option, right? It addresses most of the needs that we have. So I'm curious as to why, or what the flexibility is. Why don't we just submit for the the thing that solves the most issues. And then if it's not a hard, commitment to that solution, what flexibility does the MSBA have, or do we have to say, well, that's what we submitted for, but actually the town thinks that we might go in this direction? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So the MSBA has a multi-module process, right? And the first module is the invitation to eligibility phase. And so we submit a statement of interest which says we identify, and I'm just going to use, because you talked about option 6, I'm going to use option 6 in response to the question. We identify Thurston as our priority project. Thurston is an issue that we are looking to solve. In that SOI, what we would write about, we talk about the issues at Thurston as it relates to the building itself. We talk about the issues related to capacity. We talk about the work that we've done in the master plan. And we would say that in looking at Thurston, we want to explore, because we always need to explore just repairing. It may not be the viable option, but the MSBA makes you look at that, right? Because you want to have that. We would have to look at renovation or renovation addition, because again, you have to look at that. But then we would basically, options 3, 5, and 6 would all be on the table with submitting an SOI. And the MSBA would make us look at all of those options in that process. They wouldn't necessarily make us look at 6 if it wasn't on our radar, but since it's on our radar, we would submit it as part of our SOI. And so that initial phase is just saying we want to partner with you. And then the decision for how we fine tune that option, that's the second key decision point. What's the grade configuration? What's the location? What's the enrollment? What's the size? What does the building look like? Even within that, is it one consolidated 5-8 middle school, or is it a co-located 5-6 upper elementary and 7-8 middle? All those things would fleshed out with feasibility. I think to your point, your question about 6, that you believe. Let me just go to here. That you believe that 6 may be the preferable option. This is why we would be having these conversations over the next 2 or 3 years. 6 on its face is probably the most financially viable option, but people may or may not think it's the most educationally appropriate option, right? It goes back to that guiding principle about we want the most educationally appropriate and cost-effective solution to our building problems. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that. But.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to kind of dumb it down a little bit. The statement of interest basically says, we have a problem school. This is our school. These are some potential solutions that we've already come up with, but we don't even know if these are going to be any of the solutions, or they're going to be more. We give them all this sort of information about the school. These are the existing conditions. Here's a study we did. And if they say yes, come into our program, we then can't pivot from Thurston or Sheehan. Or if we're talking about 6, we can't pivot from Thurston, right? We can't then say, hey, just kidding, we're going to use this grant money for Sheehan. What we will do and what they will require us to do, this is when I say it gets restrictive, right? There are things that they require us to do. They will require us to look at so many variations of options for Thurston, and that's what we did for Pine Hill. When we went in for Hanlon, our first pass, once we were into the feasibility, we looked at 15 different options. We then narrowed those down to 7 different options, and then we came up with the final one. That was required by the MSBA. And so when I say I actually found the process helpful, is because they force you to really think about how many options do we have? What makes the most sense? And do a very in-depth analysis. That is years from now, right? We're not even close to that because we haven't even gotten into the project, into the program. So now all we would be saying to them is, hey, we have a problem school. We'd like to talk to you about partnership. And they would say, yes, come in. But there are still multiple points. We're not committing money. We're not even committing to doing the project. In fact, we can't do the project until we get feasibility money from the town. And if that fails, the project doesn't go anywhere. So there's really sort of the only cost to us for entering this process with the MSBA right now is human capital, right?
Just our time.
It's just our time. That's it at this point. Even if we get into the project, that's all we've sunk into it.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, to your point about flexibility, if some other option were to present itself, it does not shut that off. Now, I'm only saying, because it's not going to happen unless somebody out there is willing to, but if, somebody were to donate 100 acres of completely buildable land to the town, then
Anyone?
sure, yeah, I mean, if you're out there, great. Like, that wouldn't take that off the table, because it's not one of our predefined options. But, likely it would fall into one of these scenarios.
Katie Willett again, 91 Pleasant Hill Street, Sheehan parent. So I'm going to start with a statement and then a question. Save the Sheehan. That's going to be my proposal. Just because I do love the fact that it's a community school. And I love the fact that our town has community schools and neighborhood schools. And our children grow up with their friends and can maybe ride their bikes to school if they need to. Obviously, I know it's not the same for the entire town, but we have that. And it's so special. And I also want to keep fifth grade within the elementary schools. That is something that, talking about social media having an impact on kids, let's keep our kids for as long as we can. Having them go to middle school and be on the bus with eighth graders might not be the best option. I think that that's something we also have to think about. And eliminating an entire elementary school, where those teachers are going to go. Like, where will they go? We are going to lose amazing teachers. We have kindergarten teachers at Sheehan who have been there for 26 years. They are almost at retirement age. If we close down that school in the next 10 years, they'll leave now because they are going to either have to make the decision to move to a new school district to get that 10 years that they need, or potentially be out of a job and then have to, go somewhere for a few years to get that time back. It doesn't make sense to lose those valuable assets that we have. My question is, do we have budget in the school committee to do flyers to our neighbors to let them know about this stuff? I think that was something with the FS1 project that they didn't utilize. I didn't get something in my mailbox that said, hey, or on my doorknob that said, hey, let's do this project. This is why, with those 10 bullet points, of what's the most popular reasons that we should be doing this. Do we have budget for that? I mean, I went around to all my neighbors and said, there is a facilities plan. I'm on WhatsApp groups, sharing it on our neighborhood Facebook groups that there was an event today. We're doing our part, I think, to get our little communities involved in the school communities, but it's our retired neighbors and the people who don't have kids who are going to be making these decisions in the future as well. This does impact them. It might impact the price of their house if the elementary school closes, or there's going to be a new middle school, which obviously I think we're all on board with. I think if we had a budget to say, let's put a flyer out, I will walk around. My kids will walk around. Our PTAs will get involved. We asked you to come to talk to us about it. We want to be involved because this impacts not just our generation of children, but our neighbors who are pregnant. The families who are going to be moving into town with that projected, study that you have of all the families coming in and all the kids projected to come into the Sheehan Elementary School. These are the people that are going to be affected by it. We want them to know what's going on. And I know that was a big thing. We got to get people who might not have a school email account aware of this, right? So is there something that we can do with your money right now to help, to get people aware of it? Because, half my neighborhood's not on social media, even though I think it is a great idea. But, just to get people aware, I know that with FS1 there was text messages that were going out, not in favor. But, and I know based on the financial committee reports, those were $47. They spent $47 for a text message blast to go out from a company. There's things that we could do to maybe make people more aware of this when it does come down to being on, the votes, but also what are these options, or even getting involved in the conversation. Because I think if people aren't involved in the conversation from the start, then there's more questions and there's more room for people to be unaware. And like you had said earlier, there's more, it's messier, right? Because people are just kind of making their own assumptions in their heads. So that's my...
So I'll let Maya speak to the communication piece in a second. I do just want to put a caveat on some of this, which is there are, depending upon the timing of things, there are limitations on how taxpayer dollars can be used for communication. So I'll let Maya speak to that a little bit more. I do want to come back after Maya addresses that to your comment about staff and Sheehan, because I want to just correct, or at least address one of the things that you raised. So.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing is that, we need to do a better job trying to get this information out into the community, so we will definitely take that away. There are restrictions on what we can use district funds for. And there are also campaign finance laws that control what you can and cannot do. And so, and also there's budgetary restrictions, right? A townwide mailing is massively expensive. You would be shocked how expensive it is. And is that where we want to put the school budget to, you know? So that's why, especially now when we don't have a project, right? We don't have a key decision point that we're asking the town to make in terms of financial cost, right? There, as I said, there's no financial cost implicated yet. So we're trying to do this within the regulations without, you know, recognizing taxpayer funds are very, very precious to us, without expending a lot of funds. So we're trying to get that out as best we can. We also, as a district, cannot use district emails, right? Our distribution lists to advocate for positions. That is not the role of the school, right? The school's role is to present information, answer questions, and have other people, if people want to take it up in an advocacy role, that's outside of the school. So there's limitations on what we can do in terms of that kind of thing, but we certainly want to get information out. And so, you know, I think the idea of a survey, I think, could work very well, and so everyone needs to pay attention to that. I will tell you, they did an FS1 survey, and they got 130 responses, right? So the survey is going to be only as good as the people who are motivated enough to answer it. So to the, you know, when we send this out, you need to tell everybody to fill it out so we can get as much from the community as we can. But we're definitely hearing it, right? We're hearing that we need to try and do more outreach, and we will. Particularly once we have a project, we actually start getting into making financial decisions for the town. And that's when we need you guys to decide, what are we gonna do, right?
And then just to address the comments around option 6 and if Sheehan were to close and what would happen to staff. The short version is, while there may be a small amount of staffing efficiency in that model operationally, we still would have the same number of kids in the district, and we would need pretty much the same number of teachers, more or less, to teach those kids, right? So in that kind of scenario, if grade 5 were to go into the middle school, typically what would happen would be the grade 5 teachers, not just at Sheehan, but elsewhere in the district, would go to the new 5 through 8 middle school to teach grade 5. The teachers in K to 4 would likely get distributed to the other elementary schools because you need to increase the number of classrooms in those buildings because you would be redistricting. The kids that were at Sheehan previously would need to go to the other buildings, and you would need classrooms in those other buildings. So staff would be protected in that regard because you still have the same number of students, essentially.
So you'd keep the Sheehan staff and just move them around to the different schools?
Yeah, I mean, there would be a whole lot of conversation around that you would have a few years to figure it out. There'd obviously be implications in how you do that with working with the Teachers Association, things like that. But I don't want there to be an impression that it would be an end to all the Sheehan staff, right,
I mean,
in
the
that scenario.
consolidation of Deerfield and Hanlon is a good example of that, right? We closed one school, and I think there was some impact, but I think it was minimal,
Yeah.
as I recall.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This will be real quick, so I know we have 1 minute left. And hearing that actually was helpful, because I am pro 5 through 8, but it's because I lived through it. But I started as a teacher being like, nope, 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 they're too little, no. And then learning about it. How can we, those of us who are here today who are invested in showing up, how can we help you get the word out? What can we be doing?
I'll defer that to you.
Yeah, I would say just tell people about these forums. If they can't make it to any of the forums, tell them to hopefully, take an hour and a half one night and watch the forum, watch the questions, watch the answers, and just really talk to people in your community about it. And then, and provide feedback to us if you can,
How can people do that?
Yeah, it's a good question.
That was
How
going to be
can
my
people
next
do that?
question. What's
Yeah.
the best way for that feedback? And does it, do we email your school committee email addresses and do we write forum in the subject line? Because I think that would be helpful too. Because then we can say that and give somebody.
Yeah,
people
so what we
direction.
can do is when I get back to the office, we'll create a dedicated email address specifically around facilities study.
That'd be amazing.
I don't want to give it, I don't want to say something right now because it may not be exactly, but
No, of
something
course.
like facility study at Westwood K-12 MAUS, something like that, right? So we can use that, we can push that out to people, and that would be a way that to at least have it be not clutter inboxes in a way where things get missed or lost.
Okay. No, that would be,
There's one
thank you.
dedicated.
I was just hoping for a potential solution.
Yeah.
for this.
Yes.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
Thank you. Sure.
Sure.
I just wanted to, so Danielle Uso, 29 Stern Street. I just wanted to know so redistricting sounds great to me, and that's something that's
Other
like-
people may not feel the same way,
Right,
but
so
yeah.
that's what my
yeah.
question was. So I am assuming that there are some people who would not feel that way, and I wanted to know from the community's perspective, what would be like pros and cons of redistricting? Like, how does it impact taxpayers and community and potentially money?
So I'm going to acknowledge that as a really challenging question at the very end of a forum. And again, we are a few years away from that. But having had this experience previously, you know, families are understandably and appropriately like really engaged with the culture of the school and the community in which they live and where their children go to school. So I mean, the cons around redistricting are the fact that you are, you know, by its very nature, families may not wind up in the same place as where they were when they started the process, right? I think what is really important if we're going through a redistricting process is to, you know, have a group that is involved in that includes not just school folks, but includes representatives from our families to be part of that team. That you really want to identify some clear principles and goals of design before you go into that process, because I'll be quite honest, because it will involve like showing maps and showing where attendance lines would move. And, you know, the second you put a map up on the screen, families will look at that map and say, oh, I'm good, I'm all set, and then tune out, or you're
I'm on
moving
that
my kid,
line,
I'm
right.
ready to go to war, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's why, and that's an overstatement, right?
Like
But that's
their
why.
neighbor is now going to a
Yeah,
different
but that's
school
why
and
it's
they're
really
upset.
important to identify what those design principles are. They may be, for example, we want to make sure that we keep neighborhoods together. We want to make sure that we are looking at levels of demographic equity in terms, you know, there may be all kinds of things, and
Sure.
and we would figure out what that process is.
Okay.
But it would be, if it were done in conjunction with a building project, the advantage that we would have that most districts don't have the advantage of is we would have time to do that in a really thoughtful manner. We wouldn't be redistricting in response to a budget crisis. We'd be redistricting in response to a well thought out plan, which would give us time to go through that process from a more input gathering perspective.
Gotcha, thank you. I figured I was naive on that.
No,
That's
no,
why I
no,
wanted
it's
to
a
ask.
great question, and I'm happy you raise it, right? Because it is, it can be a challenging process.
Yeah.
But it's one that, again, we would want to be transparent about what our principles of design are.
We
for
did
how do
have
that.
we had a mini experience of it with the Deerfield and Hanlon merger also. So that wasn't very disruptive to other,
Other
districts
districts.
of the, but for students, and families that used to attend the Deerfield, that was a significant change. And
Yeah.
there was a long process with teachers supporting and thinking, and the PTOs working together to kind of think about how to do this.
All right.
So thank you all so much for your time. For those that stuck it out all the way through to the end, I think we all really appreciate it. We're going to continue to have these forums. Please, I think, to what we've been talking about, publicize this with your neighbors, with your colleagues, with your friends in the community. I want to thank Maya Plotkin, School Committee Chair Lemma Jean-Baptiste, Director of Finance Operations Tony Mullen from the School Committee for being here. And thank you all again for being here. Please share the word, and we look forward to further conversation. So,
Thanks,
enjoy the day.
everyone.
Thank you.